Hi friends, happy Sunday. Last two topics. Alrighty. So pressure is something I think about a lot in terms of the torso. I think like breathing and pressure are obviously very related, but I think it's very easy to be very aware of your breathing without being aware of pressure at all. And I was aware of neither for most of my life. And I think started, I would say that my, I guess, paradigm shift around breathing, the biggest one that I've had so far, was when I was introduced to Postural Restoration Institute thinking, which I talked about that in my legs video, I believe. But there were like a few different physical therapists who like subscribe to PRI training and methodology and thinking and all of that. And they all talked about breathing in a similar way and in a way that was very different from what I had ever heard. I think the two things that I had always been taught about breathing are deep breaths are really good, which I always interpreted as big inhales, like inhale really big. And two, belly breathe, which basically came from like the random sporadic yoga class that I would go to, which like I hate yoga, but sometimes you just find yourself in a yoga class. I don't know. And they would always tell you like breathe into your belly and not your chest, which never really hit me right. It never felt right, and just like intuitively it seemed wrong. And I think a big part of that, honestly, was like just like my aesthetic sensibilities. I'm a pretty aesthetically driven person, especially when it comes to like health and bodies, which can be unhealthy for sure. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that there's like a really big push in mainstream culture these days to deprioritize aesthetics when it comes to health. But I don't think it's good to disregard it entirely. And I do think that aesthetics can be a really valuable guide. And like, you know, having this sort of like vague aesthetic aversion to like big pooching out belly every time you breathe, that could easily be just like an unhelpful aesthetic preference, or it could be telling you something about the ideal function of the human body and how things are supposed to function. So I felt very validated when I was introduced to the PRI thinking about breathing, which is basically, it starts with, there's a lot going on with like PRI and breathing and rib cage and all of that, but they start with the acceptance that the lungs are not in the belly. They are like in your chest and your rib cage. So your chest should expand when you breathe, and your belly will also expand because you are introducing pressure into the whole system. But it should be like, as they put it, like a 360-degree expansion around your chest, your ribs, your belly, your back, which a lot of people don't think about breathing as like expanding their back at all or like their sides at all. But they're like, yeah, it should be like a 360-degree, like, which gets back to the pressure thing. Like, it's not just like an isolated organ filling up, when you breathe, you are changing this whole like pressure system of your torso. So it should be kind of like a nice pressurized pulsing kind of thing. So that was very revolutionary to me. I felt very validated. And I also realized that up until that point, my ribs didn't really move when I breathed. I've always, this is another like aesthetic thing. I think it's probably fair to call it an unhealthy fixation for me. Like, I can admit that. I can admit that it's something that I'm, conscious of and aware of and would ideally have less of. But I've always felt that I have a disproportionately large rib cage, because like it's not something I would ever like measure and want the number to be smaller. It's more like proportional to the rest of my body and like the size of my hips or my arms or whatever. It has just always seemed like bigger. And honestly, the way that I would most commonly respond to that in my head is to want like bigger arms and bigger legs and a bigger butt so that I would be like proportional. So it's definitely not like a pure size thing. But anyway, that's kind of a tangent. The point is that I never had an awareness of the rib cage as something like malleable with like bones that can move and muscles that can move, protecting lungs that do move and like move many, many times throughout the day. And I had to like learn how to breathe in a different way when I started doing these like different PRI exercises, where like I had to learn how to engage different muscles in my torso to have more forceful and longer exhales, and to like loosen up my rib cage a little bit so that it could move when I breathe, and learning how to redirect pressure to like my sides and my back rather than just like this whole like front torso area. And yeah, basically like just total paradigm shift when it comes to breathing and pressure. And sort of feeding into that, I did this one program from, I think her name is Sarah Duvall. Her company is CES, Core Exercise Solutions, and it's very like PRI influenced, but I don't think they use that like branding or anything. And actually a lot of these like sort of like breathing focused physical therapy programs are really targeted at like postpartum women, but very much focusing on breathing and coordination of the abdominal muscles and the pelvic floor, and how the diaphragm of the pelvic floor and the diaphragm of your throat are sort of like related in how they function, or ideally they should be, because they're the top and bottom of this like pressurized canister of your torso. And anyway, I did her program, and just for like muscular reasons, they were very focused on exhales and getting a really long like compressive exhale where you're kind of like compressing all of your abdominal muscles and really getting all of the air out, really like, yeah, compressing everything. And at around the same time, I started seeing a breathing coach in the style of Buteyko breathing, which is basically a school of thought around breathing less and increasing CO2 tolerance. So there are like all these different exercises for like reducing your breathing, which, another paradigm shift, totally at odds with the advice I'd gotten my whole life, which was to like basically breathe more. Like always take a deep breath. If you're sleepy, take a deep breath. If you're stressed, take a deep breath. If you're blah 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 blah, take a deep breath. And I never really liked that advice because I, for a really long time, especially like in my, you know, teen and 20s years, I don't know, I don't remember when I was a kid, I don't remember what my breathing was like, but in like recent memory, I really struggled with air hunger a lot, where I would just always have this like nagging feeling that I can't get a deep enough breath. And like I was almost like always, it felt like I was always at the upper range of my like breathing range. Like if your breathing range is like inhale, exhale, exhale. I felt like I was always operating like up here, just sort of like trying to get little gulps of air to get that, to make that feeling of air hunger go away. It's like the feeling of needing to yawn, sort of, in a way. I don't know. I assume most people have experienced this at some point in their lives, maybe. But for me, it was like kind of all the time. And it was really unpleasant. And it led to a lot of like unhelpful muscle habits, I think, such as probably not exhaling fully and keeping this like really expanded like rib cage inhalation state. But yeah, so like my experience with like taking a deep breath was like kind of the feeling of doing that and still feeling like I'm not getting enough oxygen. So that whole like advice, the normal breathing advice that had somehow just imprinted itself into my head throughout childhood, throughout my young life, just never worked for me. And this like new advice, this Buteyko way of thinking about breathing, where it's like, no, you want to breathe less. You actually need less oxygen. You're actually trying to increase your tolerance to CO2. You're trying to increase how long you can go without breathing, without feeling like you need to breathe. Like not trying to force, like the way that they plot progress is through the control pause, where you're breathing normally, and then at the end of a breath, when you're totally like still and normal and calm, you just hold your breath. Like you're not like inhaling and then you're like breathing normally, and then you stop breathing and you have to start breathing again as soon as you feel like a strong urge to. So you're not, it's not like a forced breath hold. It's like actually trying to see how long you can hold your breath without force and without stress, I guess, and without like preparation. So anyway, that was like my second big paradigm shift when it comes to breathing. And I don't know like which of those two things, I think those two things together have definitely changed my breathing habits and overall way that the overall way that I approach breathing, because that's something that you have to have a way to approach in your daily life, obviously. Like for a while I was doing like these muscle focused PT exercises that were very like compressive and exhale-y in nature. And also these Buteyko breathing exercises, which would be like, there's one called many small holds, where in between each breath, you just hold your breath for like a really, really short period of time. And sort of like, I ended up combining these two approaches into a breathing exercise that I would do every day, sometimes a couple times a day for a little while, where I would just like I would count my inhales and my exhales, and as time went on, as I was sitting there, I would try to like increase my exhales by like one additional count every few breathing rounds, with a focus on like basically like making my torso and my rib cage and everything as like small and compressed as possible on every exhale, and essentially trying to like bring myself down into this like lower range of breathing where I'm not inhaling fully. So like if in my air hunger days I was like up here, like inhale, exhale with these breathing exercises, I was trying to be like inhale, exhale. Because, you know, if you have a certain behavioral pattern for a really long period of time, that can get ingrained. I mean, it obviously gets ingrained in like your habits, but it can also get ingrained like structurally. And so I'm kind of trying to like, I guess, test the hypothesis that maybe over enough time of like having a breathing pattern that is now biased in the opposite direction from what it was for my prior life, that would, you know, do something. But yeah, my body really, really likes this whole new paradigm around breathing and pressure, which is basically breathe less and pressurize more. And it's something I still need to work on a lot. I don't have a lot of core strength. That is a big weak link for me. And, you know, you can only have so much like containment of pressure when your core is really weak. And this ties into another thing I wanted to talk about with pressure. Good segue, Alyssa. I thought I was going to have to just do like pause on an unrelated note. But one thing I've noticed is that back to the sort of like aesthetic observations, everybody notices this. This is like a normal thing of like noticing that you feel a lot like skinnier in your like torso in the morning compared to the evening. And usually that's attributed to like bloat. So like maybe from like foods you've eaten or whatever. But for me, and I'm sure that plays into it, you know, in the morning you're empty, whatever. But I have noticed that it makes more sense when I apply the frame of pressure and compression rather than like bloating to kind of explain this, because I have noticed that that the overall stress level of my nervous system seems to be highly correlated with the relative like inflation of my torso. And I mean like my rib cage and like my belly and stomach. So like first thing in the morning when I have been horizontal all night and haven't had to deal with any stress yet, it's like if I then do my like compressive breathing exercises, I can make my torso so tiny. It's crazy. Versus at the end of the day, if I do the exact same breathing exercises, it's like all of the muscles in my like torso are like rebelling against the compression. And I also don't feel as well. Like I feel like it's hard to describe. It's like my whole nervous system just feels more stressed. And probably related to this, one of the like somatic inputs that my body really, really likes oftentimes is to be compressed or smushed. So either like having somebody like wrap their arms around my middle and like squeeze really hard, or just fully lay on top of me and like smush me. If that is what my body is asking for and I'm able to like get it, the level of like full body instantaneous like relaxation response that I get in my nervous system is like unreal. It's wild. I bought this like stretchy like belly band from Amazon for when I don't have a person around who can squeeze me. So when I need that, I'll try to like wrap myself really tightly in it, and it works pretty well. Not as good as another person, but like it's like pretty solid. And I don't know, to me, like that tells me that in my brain, all of these things have to be related. And I would assume that in an ideal world, my actual core muscles would be strong enough and have like high enough muscle tone to provide that like sort of like stabilizing compressive input to myself without needing to be smushed regularly. But yeah, it does seem to be, there does seem to be like a relationship between my nervous system stress levels and my level of torso compression. So I don't know, just some observations about pressure and breathing, you know? Hope you're all doing good, and I will see you tomorrow for my last video. Not my last video, probably, but my last one for this challenge that I devised for myself. Okay, bye.